Hey guys, Fox here, and today it is time to do the Week 10 power rankings for the 2024 United Football League season. We have just 1 week remaining in the regular season, and this past week, well, we had some upsets. It had been multiple weeks since we saw any upset, and this week produced two of the biggest upsets of the entire season, to the point where the top four finally has some movement. We haven't seen any movement in the power rankings in weeks because of just games ending exactly how you expected. No real shocking close games. But this past week, well, there's some change. The fact is, the top four teams, you can almost argue them to be in any position. Really, the only arguments you can't really make are the Battlehawks at 1 or the Stallions at 4. But every other position, whether it be Brahmas at 1, Brahmas at 4, Michigan at 1, Michigan at 4, the Battlehawks at 2, Battlehawks at 3, Stallions 1, 2, 3, or 4. You can legitimately make a case for any way, aside from pretty much the two I just said. And so with that, we actually have some change. Now, we're also going to be going over what each team's Week 10 goals are. Now, yeah, some of these are repetitive, as some teams have the exact same goal, but now that we have 1 week left of the season, and some teams are playing for something, some have nothing to play for, there are different goals each team has. So without further ado, let's get started with the first four teams being the four we all kind of agree on are pretty bad. Two of them are pretty bad, because number 8, the Memphis Showboats. Is there any shock at this one? Look, I'm gonna sound like a broken record. I could say I'm not gonna, I'm gonna. Look, they're still the worst team in the big three categories, right? Their offensive yards per game, they're still the worst in the league by 13 yards per game. Yes, they're able to consistently put up more points, but especially in recent weeks, even the Roughnecks offense has just looked better at scoring as well. Then, of course, you have defense. They have given up by far the most points this season. Over 50 more points allowed than the Renegades, who are second to worst. And yards per game, they're also the worst at 358. They're one of just two teams currently allowing 300 yards per game. And a huge reason why they're only one of two is because the offense played so bad that DC was able to go under 300 yards allowed of defense. And then turnover differential, they're still the worst in the league at -6. I mean, again, yes, stats don't say everything, but when your stats say that you're the worst offense, worst defense, and worst overall turnover team, you can't really argue that, especially when in the defensive side of things, it's by such a wide margin. Again, yes, the Renegades' rushing defense is still worse, but overall, the Showboats' defense is just a horrific unit. I mean, when you're allowing over 35 more yards per game and over 50 more points across the season than the next worst team, that's pretty bad. When you pair that off with a terrible offense, it's a recipe for just disaster. And with that, I mean, can I really say anything good about the Showboats? I mean, really, they've had like one somewhat close game basically the past, 6, 7 weeks, and that was against Michigan, and even then it really wasn't that close a game. Most games are getting blown out. The fact is, the DC game was a regional broadcast game, and they cut away from it before the midway point of the third quarter. That's how bad a game it was. It was just bad. Number 8's the Showboats, not really much to talk about. Now, their Week 10 goals are simple. Secure the number 1 overall pick. Yes, I know some people are going to say the number 1 overall pick isn't a super big deal, especially when you look at how Jarrett Horst has been questionable for Michigan, and he was a number 1 overall pick. But the fact is that it still is a big deal, and of course we don't know how they're going to clinch it. Look, the United States Football League back in 2022 had a very similar situation. The 1-8 Maulers were ending up playing the 1-8 Panthers in Week 10. They were the two worst teams in the league, just like this year, how the Showboats play the Roughnecks in Week 10. Both are 1-8, the worst team in the league. And Daryl Johnson, famously announced that the winner of the game would get the number 1 overall pick. There is a very real shot they do that again, especially since, at least on the schedule, this is the final game of the season for the regular season. So having this game actually be for something, being the number 1 overall pick, could make this actually enjoyable. Of course, fans of the UFL remember how that was the Paxton Lynch game, where Paxton Lynch actually gave people a lot of hope for him because he had that incredible game for Michigan and just demolished the Maulers. Will that happen again in terms of it being the winner gets the number 1 overall pick? We'll see. Hopefully they do it, but there is, the question of Arlington, because technical tiebreakers, Arlington could get, kind of screwed over in that regard, blah, 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 but not really. So it's up for debate, but I think that either way, it's very clear that Memphis's only goal is to get the number 1 overall pick. Look, they already know they're using, T. Will and Josh Love. I wouldn't be shocked if Love starts, or using, other QBs to get whether it be film, info for next year, and all that. But at this point, it's just get the number one overall pick any means necessary. If you have to lose, you lose. If you have to win, you win. We'll see what ends up happening, but that's their goal. Number 7 is the Roughnecks. Look, the Roughnecks, they did keep it pretty close against Michigan. I mean, the final score was like a 4-point game. Apologies not having on here. It was like 26-22. It was a very close game, but at the end of the day, the Roughnecks had a shot to win it, and they didn't. But overall, stat-wise, they did get outplayed, and in fact, the whole game they were getting outplayed. It was that a couple of very big things for Michigan, the 2 turnovers Michigan had, that was a huge reason why Houston was in it. The missed field goal by Jake Bates, again, was a huge reason why Houston was in it. Because overall, Michigan was the better team. It took a lot of extracurricular things, pretty much the easy way to view it. But the big difference was that they just let Breland Speaks go off. Look, those 4 sacks, most of those were Breland Speaks. Breland Speaks has just basically completely stolen the DPOY from really his teammate Kai Nakua to most people with how good he played in this game. And I mean, look, Nolan Henderson, that stat line looked a lot weirder. The final drive made his completion percentage actually go up a lot. It was like 4 of 10 at one point, which 7 of 18 isn't great, but, 2 TDs, 150 yards. It was a very weird stat line. Sinnett also played, but didn't, do a ton. Henderson's ground game proved to be, once again, a really solid feature for him. Thompson had 1 big rush, but again, was overall pretty disappointing. And as I alluded to with the Showboats, the Houston offense is still one of the worst in the league at 246.7 a game. Look, credit, where it's due. They did technically keep it close. Did it take, multiple turnovers? Yes. Was there that potential game-winning interception late? Yes. If it wasn't for Mariner's incredible rip from the Roughnecks defender, it would have been an interception. True. But at the end of the day, they still had a chance to stop Perkins on the final drive and couldn't. Then they had well more than enough time to score in the final drive, but a couple of bad plays, bad decisions, ended up forcing them to, rush some plays. They couldn't stop Speaks, and in the end, they lost the game. Roughnecks deserve the 7th spot. They're still better than Memphis, but they're still clearly the 2nd worst team in the league. Now, their Week 10 goal is the exact same as Memphis. Win the number 1 overall pick. Whether it be that you have to win the game or you have to lose it. That's your goal. Again, they're understanding the same way Memphis is. Playing your other QBs. That's why you saw Henderson get so many snaps. That's why Garantano is not playing. Yes, there's, the injury stuff, but mainly it's because they know, hey, let's see what Henderson has. And Henderson has looked like the best QB on the team for sure. It's not even close. So he should probably start next week and probably will play the whole game. So Josh Love versus Nolan Henderson, very much a possibility. But again, no matter what, the goal for them is win in Week 10 if it means getting the number 1 overall pick, or lose in Week 10 if it means getting the number 1 overall pick. Number 6 is the Arlington Renegades. I think some people might move them up because of the upset, but I'm not going to do that. Look, at the end of the day, they beat a backup QB. Yes, Manny Wilkins is one of the better backup QBs, at least from what we've seen, mainly because of his incredible ground game. But the ending was pretty bad. He had a couple awful interceptions. 2 of those interceptions were literally in the last 3 minutes of the game. Wilkins had a shot to, give the Battlehawks, the lead on a game-winning drive. And he threw a very bad interception where the defender just read him like a literal kid's picture book. And then ended up returning it for the house. And ironically, after that, they would get a pick 1, the Battlehawks, by intercepting, a pass by Perez in the 1-point attempt. And would return that, and that would be their only score. Because then in the next drive, Wilkins would throw another interception. Not good. Look, Perez actually had one of his worst games of the season, believe it or not. Because yes, 24 of 36 for 259, 3 TDs and 0 interceptions is actually one of his lesser games of the season, believe it or not. That's how good he's been. Look, the Renegades in a lot of marginal stats are still really good, right? They still have the best third down percentage, the best turnover differential, and they have the best passing yards a game. The issue is still their defense. Yes, it's gotten somewhat better, kind of, but it's still the worst. It's still the 2nd worst in the league. 198 is the 2nd worst. 321 is the 2nd worst yards per game. Again, it's what we've always been talking about. The Renegades' Achilles heel this whole season has been their defense. Yes, their rushing game has been pretty bad, hot and cold, but their defense as a whole has been pretty bad for most of the year. There's a huge reason why the team is not as good as they really should be. In the end, the Renegades still are 6. I don't see them going up to 5. I know they did beat, the Battlehawks, but the final score does not indicate how close this game was. It was a barely, one game against a backup QB. It's hard to argue them really moving up after this past week, especially considering the fact that the team at 5 did their job and did it well in what they were supposed to do. And it's pretty hard to punish a team above you for doing their job when it's not like, the Renegades beat, a fully healthy Michigan team, a fully healthy San Antonio team. They beat a banged up St. Louis team. Was there questionable decision making by Beck not putting in AJ? Yes. Was it kind of a defeatist mentality? Yes. Because the fact is that, talked about there's other people before, it very much seems like the Battlehawks really didn't care about winning this game, which questionable why they wouldn't care, but it very much felt that way, especially not putting in AJ late, which we'll get to that when we get to the Battlehawks, but at least for now, number 6 is the Renegades. Now, their Week 10 goal is play spoiler to DC. Look, there is no way they get the number 1 overall pick. If they do, the winner or loser, the Houston or Memphis gets the number 1 overall pick. So there's really no actual goal for Arlington, especially since the Houston-Memphis game happens after this one. So even if they do it where the loser gets the pick and it's like normal, even then they'd have to have, a specific team lose to get tiebreaker for the 2nd overall pick. And then in terms of playing other guys, because of, the Lindsey Scott injury, at this point, it's just play spoiler. Look, Prez has been dominant all year. If he wants to play, let him play in Week 10. This is probably the only QB I'd say that if they want to play, you let them play in Week 10. He's been incredible this season. Let him get that win, especially because it'd be hilarious if they beat DC again, this time to stop them from going 500, because that's basically what DC's entire goal is to finish 500. So if you're able to go in there and actually beat them, that'd be a really, really funny thing, especially since they're playing at DC. Beating them at Audi Field to prevent them from being 500 will be just one more nice gut punch by the Renegades to the Defenders, and definitely could make that rivalry into a truly big thing. So that's basically the only goal I have for them. I don't really think there's anything else they really need or should do. Just simply put, go into DC and beat the Defenders. Now, number 5 is going to be the DC Defenders. Look, they did their job. They won 36-21. 14 of those points by the Showboats were in the 4th quarter. The game was a complete blowout. Look, DC is still one of the worst teams in defense and turnover differential. They're not the worst, but they're one of the worst. Their overall schedule is still one of the weirdest of the year. They started 3-1, but even are 2-1. But even at 2-1, they really did not feel like a powerhouse because both their wins were very fluky. And as we joked about, their best game they played in their first 3 games was their loss at San Antonio because of all the random stuff that made that final score what it was. The Birmingham game, Birmingham did everything they could to lose and then still ended up winning. And then since then, it just hasn't been good. Look, DC has been a very weird team, despite the fact that when you look at their overall schedule, just, in a box score sense like we're doing here, even though it looks like DC is a really solid team this year, you never really felt that way. A huge reason is the poor QB play. Yes, I know Defenders fans will try to blame everything else. But guess what? It's not like Luis Perez is playing with, the insane, a Patriots offensive line from the Tom Brady era, right? He's not playing with a dominant O-line. Yet, look what he's doing. Yes, I know Te'amu, missing the receivers from last year, missing his running back from last year. But at the end of the day, it's very similar to 2022 with the Bandits. It seems that Te'amu needs everything around him to be good to actually play well. He's not elevating the guys around him. That's what Perez is doing. Te'amu isn't doing. Reggie Barlow was expected to be what he was considered last year, one of the best coaches in the league. Instead, we're now thinking he was potentially carried by talent as well, because week after week he's making horrid coaching decisions, and especially in regards to the quarterback, which I'll get to in a second, he has been pretty bad. But at least for this game against Memphis, they did the job. It's not hard. Memphis is a terrible team. They had over 200 more yards than Memphis. They obliterated Memphis, who played 2 different quarterbacks. Despite also having 2 turnovers, both teams did, they still obliterated them. Prevented them from getting a 4th and 12 again. Credit where it's due. DC did get the win that they were supposed to, but they're only still at 5 because they did their job. I wouldn't be upset if somebody put the Renegades above them, though, especially since I do think Arlington has a really good shot at winning next week. Now, the Week 10 goals for DC, finish 500, and for the love of God, please start McClendon. Look, we've seen enough of Te'amu. We know what he is. Yes, he had one of his best games of the year, and even then it was still 2 interceptions, and it was against the Memphis defense, so it's really not saying that much. The biggest issue for DC this season is their over-reliance on Te'amu. Instead of playing another quarterback, they've always used Te'amu and try to not use anyone else. Start McClendon, whether it be to actually win the game or whether it be to see what he has. Instead of just letting him get a couple of drives here or there because of injuries or just because the game's a blowout, actually let us see what he can do. Remember, he was what many people said Dormade was. He was actually carrying a completely garbage roster. Dormade's roster was better than McClendon's, at least offensively, was better than what McClendon had in Vegas. Yet McClendon was playing better than Dormade was with that roster. Let us see what McClendon can do with this DC team. Is he going to go off and be, dominant? No, this team is not good enough to let him be dominant. But it's still good enough to where we can see McClendon play better than Te'amu. Give him a full week of reps with the first team. Let him go out there and play. There is legitimately zero reason to start Te'amu. Even if it's to finish 500, exactly what do you accomplish? You prevent a potential future QB in McClendon from getting valuable game time to win a game that at the end of the day has no meaning. Win or lose, it does nothing for their draft stock. It does nothing for really anything except morality. But even then, would you rather barely eke out a win against Arlington at home with Te'amu? Or would you rather lose but see McClendon put up a really solid game and say, hey, this guy can be something in the future? Start McClendon. I would say, because they really liked Francois, I would say start him, but, he's on IR. At this point, start McClendon. Let us see what he can do. Don't put out Te'amu again for no real reason. Te'amu's not going to win any sort of award. He's not going to really move up the charts of the best QB tier list or anything. He's already fallen this year. Just let us see what McClendon has. That's their goal for Week 10. Let us see what Jalen can do. It'll be fun. Because, again, it's a game that doesn't matter. Just let us see what this kid can do. Now, number 4, the St. Louis Battlehawks. Yes, I know Battlehawks fans are going to be really shocked at them dropping this far, but at the end of the day, it's one of those, I can't really justify them being higher. The more I looked at this, the more I was thinking, can I really make an argument for St. Louis to be number 3 or number 2? I can't. You still lost to Arlington. Yes, you were missing AJ, but he wasn't technically hurt. He was still on the field. He was still on, as QB2. This wasn't even a Danny Etling. He's QB3. He's an emergency QB. He's the backup. We'll put him in if we need him to. Yet you never put him in, even though you needed to. Especially in the fourth quarter, we should have seen AJ play. The fact that we didn't makes it appear that this team really did not care about winning this game. That's what it does. Look, I get it. You can't control your own destiny this week in Week 9. But if you had won this game, it meant that San Antonio would have been forced to win against the Stallions, or they would have, given home field advantage to St. Louis. Instead, St. Louis basically threw their hands up and said, we'll just play for Week 10. That's what they did. But the issue now is that we're having another week where McCarron isn't getting reps with his guys, isn't, playing actual game time experience with his guys. So he's going to be coming in a little bit rusty. Do I think it's going to look as bad as Etling did? Not necessarily. But it still is a huge question mark. And now you're also saying, why did you keep Manny out there? Because now you've potentially damaged his confidence. Because again, it wasn't one, it was back-to-back interceptions on a potential final drive. Yes, the second one, the game was basically out of reach. But that doesn't, help build his confidence. So if he's forced to come in like we saw in 2022, where we saw Alex Magoo come in the championship game and KJ Costello because of injuries. So instead of it being he's going to, make a, comeback to play a game potentially if AJ gets hurt and be like, yes, I can do this. It's going to be, well, the last time I was on the field, I threw 2 game-losing interceptions. Jacob Saylors had a great game, 38-yard long. Even without it, still had an incredible game. Manny Wilkins, again, rushing was great. But this was a game that they should have won. Look, everybody was pretty much healthy except Manny. Except AJ, but even then, there was, a lot of guys came back off the injury report, and they just lost. Look, third down percentage are the worst in the league. They're still good in the return averages, but overall, they're a very mid-team in most stats. Overall offense, overall defense, turnover differential, they're pretty mid in most of those stats, but they're really bad in third down percentage. Now, it's not horrid. We've seen worse, but it's still not great. 36% is still, you'd like it to be higher, especially when, the team you're playing in Week 10 has a higher one than you. Yes, it's only by 0.8, but it's still better. Again, St. Louis has to be 4 in my personal view of the power rankings. Again, you can justify them pending your argument 2 to 4. You can make an argument. I just think that the only argument that actually makes sense to me is 4. Because Michigan, they got the job done. They won their game. Birmingham, they just beat St. Louis. And again, Birmingham has only lost now 1 time in the last, over 150 days. And then San Antonio beat Birmingham. How can you justify St. Louis being above any of those teams? Even if you do the head-to-head argument, Michigan beat St. Louis. People forget Michigan was the better team in that game. They always harken back to the final field goal. They forget to mention the fact that the Panthers were at the 3-yard line and threw an interception, or that it took a penalty to allow St. Louis to get a touchdown instead of having to go for a 4th down conversion. Granted, that's week 1. That's why I don't talk about it, because that was, almost an entire regular season ago. But at this point, Michigan looks better, San Antonio looks better, Birmingham looks better. With that, St. Louis at 4. They're still 4, and they still can easily move back up in the power rankings by beating San Antonio in Week 10. But at this exact moment, there is really no justifying them being anywhere except 4, because AJ was supposedly healthy enough to play, yet you didn't put him in even when it was a very important situation. So because of that, number 4, St. Louis. Their Week 10 goal, simple. Beat San Antonio. Get home field advantage. Talked about this in the comments. The home field advantage for the XFL Conference Championship very much could determine who actually makes it there. Look, if St. Louis has home field advantage, the odds of the Brahmas beating them are very low. But if San Antonio has home field advantage, there's a very real shot the Brahmas make it to the championship game. Getting home field advantage is a very crucial thing. Especially for San Antonio's case, it's not even to play at home, it's just to not let St. Louis play at home. Yes, in terms of winning at home, St. Louis, wasn't as dominant as DC was, before DC started losing at home this year. But St. Louis at home is still a terrifying threat, especially in a playoff game where they're probably going to have over 40,000 people in attendance since it's a playoff game. Man, that would be horrid to go into that environment. So if you're San Antonio, yes, you'd love to win to play at San Antonio, but you're really trying to win to not play in St. Louis. That's why it's such a big deal and so important. And so getting home field advantage for St. Louis is a must-do. Look, even if you have to risk potential health of guys, playing in San Antonio versus St. Louis, you're going to give San Antonio a much better shot at winning in the playoff game, especially if you allow San Antonio to head into that playoff game having gotten their QB1 back, having him beat the Stallions and then beat the Battlehawks in Week 10. They're going to be riding on an incredible high, whereas if you're a Battlehawks player, you're thinking, man, we just lost back-to-back games. That's not good. And so with that, it's simple. You have to win in Week 10. It's a must-win game. That's what St. Louis's only goal in Week 10 should be. Number 3, the Michigan Panthers. I said if they got the job done against Houston, they'd move up to 2. I do not count a 4-point victory as getting the job done. They should have beaten them by at least 10. They still won, though. That's why they're still at 3. Look, Mariner, incredible play. Potential play of the year, breaking up the interception and making it into a reception. I said it, on X. I concede, I think that at this moment, Perkins is a better QB than Danny Edling. Perkins' final drive was incredible. Yes, the, potential interception would have been horrific. But his ground game is just so dynamic and so insane. It puts a whole nother level to what he can do. Passing-wise, he was very close to Edling, in fact, technically better. But on the ground, he was insane. And look, the one thing that there is a silver lining to this game, they were able to win it without having anyone actually play that good from the running back position. Look, McCreary, he added the touchdown, but him and Colburn, neither of them really played all that well, yet they still won this game. Marcus Sims was hurt. They still won this game. And again, Bates missed a field goal, which we're not, it's not a good thing that he's now missing kicks consistently the past couple weeks. But they still had a missed kick, and they still had more turnovers than Houston did, yet still won the game. And a huge reason for that is that Breland Speaks is back. Look, Breland Speaks is very much playing like the inverse of 2023. In 2023, he started off the season incredibly hot, but then kind of tapered the second half of the season. This year, it's the opposite. He started off kind of slow, but he's getting better and better, which is what you want to see. To where now, he's the DPOY. I mean, I really don't see an argument for anyone else, especially because you can very much make the case that, aside from the Mariner play, Speaks is the reason why Michigan won this game. He had multiple crucial sacks on the final drive for Houston, and now leads the league in sacks at 8.5. And so that's a huge deal, especially since Carlos Davis has basically been leading the sack total for the entire year. All of a sudden, it speaks. Look, the Panthers' defense is 3rd in the league in points allowed, one of the best in yards per game as well allowed, and their rushing game, even with, having a down week this week, even when you include Perkins, it's still the 2nd best in the league at 124.2. So when you look at all of that combined, and you remember this is doing it without Frank Gidna, who's going to be out until potentially the championship game, yeah, Michigan still deserves to be 3. They don't deserve to move up because, again, they did have to, barely eke out a win against Houston, but they're still very clearly among the elite teams of the league and deserve to be the number 3 team in the league. Their goal for Week 10, pick your QB for sure and then don't get hurt. Look, again, I think that at this moment Perkins looks the best, but we still don't know for sure who Nolan's going to go with. He needs to decide who's his QB, and then he has to make the choice on who to start in Week 10 based on that. We talked about it before. Technically, the only way that Michigan gets the number 1 seed in the UFL conference, which remember, they're still going to have to play in Birmingham, but they'll get home field advantage at Birmingham. It's weird. They'd have to win the game by like 25 points, I believe, to win by point differential, which is not going to happen. So who do you start? Well, if you want to start a guy based on getting him some reps for the playoff game, then whoever you start is who you're going to have playing in the playoff game. If you're going to do it by, you just don't want to risk a guy getting hurt, you don't play one. You see what I mean? There's a lot of, potential diversion you could do to Birmingham with this situation. Because of Perkins and Etling being the clear 2 best QBs on your roster, you're able to potentially start one, play both, play one, and make it a legit question who's going to actually play in the playoff game. Do you start Etling, let him play, and if he's playing hot, do you ride the hot hand in Week 10, or do you continue the current hot-handed Perkins? There's a lot to be desired. I think that at the end of the day, Perkins is a slightly better QB, but I do think that using the 2 QB system still could work with Etling and Perkins. It'll be interesting to see what they do, but again, very interesting what they will do, but it's simple. Pick the QB or QBs, and then don't get hurt. You already had multiple injuries. Remember, you missing Marcus Sims this past week. Gidna is out till the championship game. You don't want to add to that. So try not to get injured. So don't play starters unless you really have a shot at beating them by 25, which you probably won't. That's all I'd say. Number 2, the San Antonio Brahmas. Yes, the Brahmas come in at number 2. Look, I don't buy the argument for number 1. I don't think they've earned number 1 yet. Let's just get that out of the way. Yes, you beat Birmingham. Yes, the final score would have been more lopsided if Santosa wasn't missing field goals. But at the end of the day, you still beat a team by 1 score at home against them, missing their defensive coordinator. And you only put up 18. You still deserve the number 2 spot. Again, you would have been 3 if it had been for Michigan barely winning against Houston, but number 2 is where the Brahmas deserve. They did it. They beat the Stallions. The Stallions have lost for the first time in over 350 days. I said 150 earlier, I don't know why, but over 350 days. It's just crazy. 15 win streak is gone. And the big one is that Chase Garbers is back. Look, Garbers is back and played basically what he did before. Very check down style of football. But it's one of those where it is kind of what it is. He was, back from injury, didn't want to do anything risky. Interesting to see how he'll play next week. But yes, he came in because of a quote-unquote dormant injury and just played like he hadn't missed a step. 16 of 23, 139, 70 completion percentage. Anthony McFarland rushing, another great game, 82 yards on the ground. Once again, the team MVP. The only issues for this team is that their offense still leaves a lot to be desired. Yes, yards per game, they still are the 3rd best in the league. But when you look at this game, only putting up 18, again, they missed the field goal, but only putting up 18 points, a huge reason for that is that their QB play is still very, very scared. That's the easy way to describe it. Jontre Kirkland had basically the best pass of the day by any player, and he's a wide receiver, right? His flea flicker was like the best play of the season, or the best pass of the game, and he's a wide receiver. I get it, they're playing safe QB, but at the end of the day, if you're not going to be throwing the ball downfield, you're not really going to be in a position to actually come back in games. That's the one thing I do think the Brahmas need to do better at. What they don't need to do better at is their defense. Their defense is incredible. 135 points allowed is the best in the league. It's just crazy. And then while their turnover differential is still very much leaves a lot to be desired at -4, and their 3rd down percentage is pretty bad at 37, again, they beat the Stallions. They still have an incredible defense to the point where many people would say it's the best in the league. When you have those going for you, you're going to have a shot at winning. And with Garber's back, he is a massive upgrade over Dormady. So now that he's back, you have a legit QB1 instead of having a guy who's pretending to be QB1. So now with Garber's back, there is a real shot that the Brahmas can make it to the championship game. But to do that, they need to win in Week 10. If they lose in Week 10, I really don't see them making it to the championship game. I very much feel like the Brahmas have a real shot if they're playing the playoff game at home. Playing in St. Louis in a playoff game would be horrific in terms of, the entire crowd atmosphere. So if I'm a Brahmas fan, I don't care what it takes. You got to win in Week 10. That's the game that really matters. It's just like with the Battlehawks. Whoever wins in Week 10 is going to have a massive advantage going in to the playoff game. This isn't like, the Roughnecks game last year against the Renegades. This isn't the Stars Generals 2 years ago. This is a game that actually has matter or has indication on the playoff atmosphere. Whoever wins gets home field advantage. So both teams should go out there playing to win. Whoever wins that game not only, actually wins a massive game, but they naturally gain a huge morale boost. They hurt the other team's morale, and now they get home field advantage the next game. So simply put, just like I said with the Battlehawks, Brahmas, got to get the W. You got to win this game. The number one, the Birmingham Stallions. Look, one loss is not going to move them down. If they lose again this next week, then yes. But we saw that 2 years ago. They were, 8-0, lost in Week 9. Everybody, including myself, was like, okay, well, we'll put the Generals above them. Guess what happened? The Generals got bounced in the first round. The Stallions won the championship. They once again played without John Chavis. Massive questions on exactly what's going on with him. But this was also their worst game offensively. They only put up 9 points, the worst of the year. Martinez did not play good. His interception to lose the game was horrific. Their running game was non-existent. I don't see this team playing this badly again. Look, they're still the best team in rushing yards a game. They're still the best team in yards a game. They're still the best team in kicking points. They still are the best team in the league. One loss, especially with it being on the road, is not going to move them down. That's overreacting in my opinion. If they lose next week, then yes, they deserve to move down. But when a team has gone over a year without losing, had a 15-game win streak, one loss does not move them down, especially with it being a very close loss. We'll see what they do next week, but as for now, they're still number one for obvious reasons. Their Week 10 goals, just don't get hurt. Look, if they lose, they're going to move down in the power rankings because they have to. But at the end of the day, you don't want to get hurt next week. Play Corral, start them the whole game. Don't play many of your starters. The game doesn't really matter. Again, yes, you want to get win the conference, but the only way you lose it is if you, lose the game by like 25. So if you just keep it not even close, just, not a total blowout, you're going to get it. Get Chavis back. Whatever's going on, get him back. You need him. The defense has not been the same without him. Very important. That's all I have to say for them. Stallions at 1. So that'll do it. This has been ZomFox. If you enjoy this content, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, as I do at least 4 videos a week during the regular season. Naturally, after next week, we will finally know the full postseason picture in terms of who has home field advantage, so I can do my, playoff picks for that, as well as, getting ready for the playoffs and all that. I am doing a live stream this weekend. Don't know which game yet, probably Tank Bowl 3, and I will be live streaming the UFL Conference Championship in 2 weeks. So be on the lookout for that, and as always, guys, have a great night.